Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by Pure Strategies, Driving Action for Biodiversity, Water, and Forests, Insights from Brands. I'm Alex Navarro, Director of Nature at Trellis Group, and I'm excited to welcome you all to this conversation. All right, so for today's agenda, we're going to do this quick welcome. We'll have an intro presentation focused on corporate action on nature. We'll go into a panel discussion, take some Q&A from the audience, and then share some resources. A quick overview of what we'll be talking about. We're exploring how companies are starting to take action on nature in a range of ways, from setting science-based targets to supporting restoration projects and improving traceability and sourcing. Over the course of this webinar, we'll dig into the different approaches that three companies are taking, the challenges they faced, and some of the practical steps that are helping them make progress. I think one of the key takeaways that you'll find is that no two nature strategies are exactly the same, and it's helpful to hear how and why certain decisions are made along the way. We have a few excellent speakers with us today. So first we have Colleen Corrigan, Senior Sustainability Advisor at Pure Strategies. We have Katina Butis, Senior Director of Sustainability and Sourcing at Everlane. Sophia Calvi, Sustainability Manager at Seventh Generation. Kay Gibbard, Sustainability Director at Sol de Janeiro. All right, so well, actually we want to start by pulling up a poll to hear from all of you. So which best describes your company's progress related to nature? And this is multiple choice, so you can choose multiple answers. I'll give you a few seconds to a minute to answer this. Which best describes your company's progress related to nature? Choose as many answers as you'd like. All right, let's go ahead and wrap this poll and share the results. All right, I'm definitely seeing some patterns jumping out here, but I am going to pass this poll on to Colleen, who will kind of share her quick reactions here and then take us into the presentation. Colleen, you want to take us away?
Yes, thank you so much, Alex, and thanks so much everyone for being here and participating in the poll. This isn't surprising that there's a bit of a spread, and it's great to see that there's someone engaging on different levels for all of the insights that we have here. But you are in the right place today if nature is not a current priority, and it looks like about a third of you, this is the case. So we do hope by the end of the webinar today, this has been really helpful for you and gives you some really concrete ideas based on current actions that different brands are taking. And for those of you who are exploring and learning, I'll talk a little bit about some further opportunities related to that. And for those who have already jumped in, you're conducting materiality assessments, you're assessing your value chain, you might be engaged with GRI or TNFD disclosures, you might be setting a science-based target, excuse me, for nature, or just looking at how you might have field-based partnerships related to your supply chain, or 10% of you have a nature strategy in place for those who've responded to the poll. So it's fantastic to see that range of what's here, and we'll hear about different examples of these actions today. So I'm going to close out that poll and share a few slides just to set some context for what this webinar is all about. And we're really talking today about taking corporate action on nature. And I think it's really helpful to start out by exploring what are some of those drivers that lead companies to take action, because they're not all the same. And you may actually find that there are several influences in the ambitions or that influence what ambitions companies take. Some of those might be coming from an internal drive from the C-suite or a CEO who's very passionate about nature and knows this is an important topic. A lot of companies are influenced by reducing the risks in their supply chain. And so they've set science-based targets around climate. They might be conducting materiality or risk assessments that are leading to setting science-based targets for nature. Other companies are influenced by what their peers are doing, what the competition is undertaking, and also their customers are having an influence on some of those actions. In addition, we know the regulatory view is changing rapidly. There's a lot happening in Europe. There are things happening with policies and enforcement in different parts of the states right now, especially related to packaging. So there's a lot happening in different ways. In addition, investors are asking for a lot more in the disclosure space, such as by the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures. Nature Action 100 has shared some insights from investors and released a benchmark study recently that gives some more insight if anyone's interested around what some of those drivers are and levels of ambition. And then there's also the entire nonprofit community that's providing some pressures on taking action and how to take action, plus consumer and media attention. And then lastly, there's a lot of companies who are really driven by growth and innovation, especially around the technology space. It's also really important to think about what is nature when you are a corporation and a business. What should you be thinking about with relation to nature? Most companies will have already been involved to some degree in taking action on climate, which is part of nature. But in addition, we're talking about what's happening in the landscape, what's happening in the oceans, fresh water in lakes and rivers, and then the biodiversity, just the diversity of life in all of those different places. All of that is what taking action on nature encompasses. But it's also really important to think about the social aspects of nature too. And so it's important for companies to think about where are their actions or their business on a daily basis having impacts on indigenous and local communities around the world. And so, to be thinking about taking corporate action on nature, you also need to understand how you are related to nature. Where are your activities taking place on the planet? And so, to really develop a strategy and take action, you want to understand as geographically specifically as possible where your activities are taking place. Where are your operations? Where is your supply chain sourcing raw materials? And as we know from this map on the right-hand side of this slide here, these are the key biodiversity areas across the planet, and it's highly variable. So this is why it's really important for businesses to get a handle on as much as possible where they're impacting and connecting to nature. For a lot of companies, especially those of you on the webinar who aren't familiar with this, there's some useful resources that I'll touch on here. One of these is a list of high impact commodities that have been identified through the Science Based Targets Network. And this is a list, not just those here. I selected some of the ones that are particularly relevant to a lot of companies, but even if you're just selling a product and you're packaging that, you're using likely pulp or paper or some kind of petroleum product. So it's really important to be aware of these commodities that have been identified as having higher nature risks. And some of those risks are these elements here, the 5 top threats to biodiversity. And there's different ways that these commodities interact with those different threats and have influence in that space. But if you want to learn more about this, the diagram down on the right shows what it looks like if you do interact with the high impact commodities list. There's some resources right online that can help you walk through and better understand where those commodities sit within your value chain. There's also a range of different tools that companies can use, and some of these are really quick and easy and free to access, like the WWF Risk Filter Suite. And this includes tools that can look at biodiversity and water. And it's really insightful just from a high level to get a sense of where these impacts geographically are located. And there's other tools like the integrated biodiversity assessment tool, which has some free visual aspects that you can use, as well as subscription options for high resolution data that can be downloaded and used on different GIS platforms to do some more intricate analyses. And then there's also a range of tools like earth blocks that help with visualization and assessment of supply chain impacts for nature. And then again, the Science-Based Targets Network, as well as many other frameworks, are offering corporate manuals for different sectors and also for, importantly, how to engage with stakeholders. As I mentioned, that social aspect is so important. And just to note, yes, slides will be shared after. So don't worry about that. I'm also mentioning the Planet Forward Playbook, which you can access in the resource slide that we will share throughout the webinar today. This Planet Forward Playbook is one that we wrote at Peer Strategies with the help of different partners, just looking at how companies can start and build upon what they're already doing in the climate space and incorporating nature actions as well. One thing that the playbook does, which is useful, I think, at any point in your maturity for taking action on nature as a corporation, is to do a quick assessment of yourself. And we call this a simple gap assessment. And this helps you identify different areas in which it's important to take nature action. And the way that we identified these pillars, protect, restore, and sustainably manage, is their importance in the global biodiversity framework that came out of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity a few years ago. So, what is helpful as an approach here is to consider in these three pillars, where is your company taking action now? And by identifying those actions, you can start looking at, well, where are the gaps? Are some of your activities highly involved in the restoration pillar, but you're not doing as much in the protection of nature side? Or are you really focused on sustainable management, but you haven't really looked at how to protect or restore nature? Just doing a sample stock take can help you figure out what next steps you can start taking to fill one or more of those gaps. So we've used this process with different companies, and many others are just doing this on their own as well. But this is just showing you an example of what it looks like. Here's some actions that have come out of some of these assessments in these different pillars. So for example, if a company wants to do more to protect nature, they might have conducted a risk assessment of their value chain and found that they want to make a commitment for protection in a key geography where they might have good opportunity to have high positive impacts, and they would do that through a local partner. Another opportunity coming out of a gap assessment is to think about how you can work more with internal teams to really enhance their awareness of key nature issues, especially if, as a company, you've set a protection target. An opportunity for thinking about restoration is considering how to engage in collaborative approaches. So, restoring an area where raw materials are sourced and collaboratively if multiple companies are sourcing from a similar geography. And I'll share an example of that in just a moment. And then lastly, some companies might be considering how they can actually expand or develop policies that support nature specifically, such as developing guidance around conversion-free or deforestation-free supply chains. So one example I'll share here quickly is one from the Suppliers Partnership for the Environment, which is an automotive industry collective, and five original equipment manufacturers who are part of this suppliers partnership have come together this past year to look at how they can collectively assess their nature impacts in their supply chain. And because a the making of an auto is so complex and there's so many materials, it's difficult for many of these companies to find their data for material origin. So what we've done in this process is look at some of those high impact commodities that I mentioned earlier, and they're in this box here. Looking at where these companies, these 5 companies, did know their sourcing locations, and then where they didn't, taking a view of some global data sets on nature risks and starting to compile that with some research and literature to build a picture around mapping and analysis of these of what we started out with 17 materials and narrowed this down to 5 materials that had the broadest spectrum of nature impacts. And so this is a work in progress, but I think it's really exciting to show what the potential is for using different tools and coming together collectively around a sector to think about what are our impacts across biodiversity, land and water. Here's some indicators that are referenced in the science around how to look at where these impacts are. And then this is an example of a map just showing where some of these potential sourcing locations are for some of the highest impact commodities that these different groups are sourcing. And Toyota is one of the folks who works in this space too. And there's a case study in the resource slide at the end that will also give a little insight about some of the actions that they're taking. So I'm just going to quickly go through a slide for each of the panelists here from the 3 different brands. So to set some context for what they'll be sharing about in the rest of this webinar. So the first one is Everlane. And Everlane has used some of the data and the tools that I've just shared. They've looked at the WWF's risk filters, to get a high level view of some of the risks within their supply chain. And this box in the middle shows some of those materials that have been assessed in this process. They've used options with their knowledge around some of the sourcing locations, some of the volumes of the different materials, and created some maps that are shown here, which are in their 2024 impact report, which is also one of the resources that is shared today in the webinar. And Katina will share a lot more about her experience in taking actions along this line. Then Sophia from Seventh Generation is going to share more with us about some of these actions that they're exploring around these 3 pillars I just shared around protection of forests, around restoration, using tree planting in a number of acres around community-based restoration, and then some of the work they're doing around regenerative agriculture. And some exciting work too that Seventh Generation is doing in the space is working with local communities on the ground. An example of a local partner is Kaleka. And Sophia will tell you a bit more about what they're doing to really change the oil palm production to be much more nature positive. And then lastly, Sol de Janeiro, Kay is going to tell us more about what they're doing to work with their nature actions in more of an internal way and thinking about how to support their team members by training on what kind of nature sourcing goes into the products and the ingredients in their products, and a review of how those are plant-based, mineral, petroleum, or a combination of these. So the last slide I want to share before I hand it over to Alex and the panelists is that we have at Peer Strategies a Nature Action Forum that we've hosted for the past 3 years, and we'll start a new cohort in 2026 in the spring. So if anyone on the webinar is interested in a peer cohort where we'll learn together over the course of 2026, you can find out more information at this link here. And I'm going to hand it back over to Alex.
Thanks, Colleen. Real quick before I turn it over to the panel, I just wanted to follow up with you. Could you share a little bit more about how each of these companies kind of found their way to you as a thought partner and someone to work with? Like, does it always start with the gap assessment, or like, what does that pathway look like for getting started with you?
Sure, it's a great question. And as some of them will know, and even while we were talking beforehand, there's a lot of links between many companies, and some have started with Pure Strategies years ago. We've been around for 27 years, going on 28 years. So We have companies who've been engaged in sustainability practice and climate, especially for many years. And as nature became more central to sustainability reporting and practices, and just awareness more broadly about why biodiversity and nature is so core to what's happening around sustainability, we get clients who want to expand into that a bit more. And they might be building out through a specific strategy. They might be looking at how to reduce their impact somewhere. They might be looking at how do we develop a partnership because we source our ingredients from one particular region or country. So there's, as you said earlier, there's not a one size fits all. And we produced this Planet Forward playbook as a way to help those companies, like we saw in the poll, who are just learning. They don't realize or they're not understanding how nature is relevant to the business. So in some cases, we kind of start from scratch. And in other cases, we're already building on those who are, big leaders in this space.
Great, thank you. I think that's a perfect transition into our panel. So I'm going to start. I want to let each speaker kind of share a little bit about the company that they work for, the role that they play, and how nature is becoming part of their sustainability strategy. So I'm going to ask them each to kind of share a story, just like bring a little bit of life to each of these components here. So I'll start with Katina from Everlane.
Sure, thank you. So as Alex already mentioned, I'm Katina. I lead the sustainability and sourcing teams at a brand called Everlane. We're a fashion company that's direct to consumer, and we specialize in women's and men's apparel, footwear, and accessories. So we really cover a pretty wide range of material categories, product categories, and importantly, we have a lot of work surrounding our mission that's really driving our social impact and environmental responsibility initiatives. So at Everlane, we've really been operating on a three-pillared sustainability strategy for about the past 5 years, but a formal strategy, but we have much longer and deeper kind of commitments from the foundations of our organization. But for the past few years, we've really been operating around this three-pillared approach, which we put pretty simply: keep Earth clean, keep Earth cool, and do right by people. And within that strategy, we have set a lot of goals, and we're measuring progress against everything from our climate commitments to water reduction and preferred raw material sourcing, waste reduction, improving social impacts, and worker well-being across our value chain. So it really, spans a pretty wide range of initiatives. But our inroads into this topic kind of formally around nature and biodiversity really started with our climate commitments. And I know Colleen mentioned that that's one of the main inroads for many brands, and we're no different. We kind of took this. We've been on this path with Pure Strategies now for many years. We've been partnering with them. But we have set both near term for 2030 and long term 2050 net zero climate targets through the Science Based Targets Initiative. And to date, we've actually been really successful in the operational kind of execution of achieving some pretty big milestones. So to date, we have already reduced our absolute scope 1 through 3 footprint by 52% compared to our baseline in 2019. And that is driven almost entirely by interventions that we have initiated in our scope 3 footprint. So a lot of this work, again, tying really closely hand in hand with traceability and transparency of our supply chain and our raw materials, which we've been able to leverage into some of this more advanced work that we're now doing in nature and biodiversity. So, as we were going back to the drawing board, thinking about, not just celebrating the wins that we've had and the progress that we've been able to achieve, but thinking more into this long-term net zero strategy that we're just continuing to evolve over time. we're really starting to think more critically about the nature-based solutions as an opportunity for not just our climate commitments, but also climate resilience, a multitude of reasons across business resilience, risk mitigation, surety of supply of the raw materials that we require to create products at the end of the day. And also thinking about how we protect nature and biodiversity for the sake of these natural spaces and the communities that that kind of are involved in or thrive around them as a form of resilience. So, really thinking now, how do we harmonize this work across the complexity of systems and complexity of supply chains that we work in, and really interested and keen in focusing on kind of the landscape level approach, which Colleen also alluded to.
Thank you. One thing I just want to follow up on, you mentioned like leveraging the traceability and transparency work around raw materials. Could you just say a little bit more about that? Like if there were another company at a similar point, what's like one thing they could do to leverage that to start pulling in nature and biodiversity?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we've learned, and we've actually gone through a number of peer strategies programming to kind of educate ourselves, starting with that Nature Action Forum that they mentioned. But one of the things that we've learned, which is a little bit kind of different and novel to the work that we've been doing in climate, but closely related, is that nature-based work is really place-based. It kind of has to start in the geographies and in the specific commodities, at least for a fashion company or a products company. That's where it really needs to be centered from. So as part of the work we were already doing to better understand our value chain, really leverage traceability and transparency for the work we were doing in climate, we've been able to just tangibly take that over to our nature-based work, and really understand where both the gaps and opportunities are across the geographies that we're already sourcing in. So yeah, just having that, I think, as a foundation, which at the time we maybe didn't even know that we were doing for this reason, has really been important for the work and the way that we take it forward. And I know Colleen shared some of those earth blocks images, which has been another really exciting tool for us to be able to leverage like a visual component for our internal teams, our board, our executive leadership, to really showcase where it is that we're talking about and why it's so important and how we tie that directly to products in some cases.
Thank you. I love that. So using some of the groundwork from climate and pulling it right over to kind of skip a step for nature and biodiversity. Great. Next, I'm going to ask the same question or prompt, I guess. I'll send it to you, Kay. So tell us a story that kind of helps illustrate your work, your company, how nature ties into your strategy.
Great. Hello, everyone out there. Thank you. I'm Kay. I am the Sustainability Director at Sol de Janeiro, and we are a beauty and skincare brand that was basically born on the beaches in Rio. So in Brazil, a country that holds 20% of the world's biodiversity. And we source a lot of our iconic ingredients from Brazil, so like cupuaçu and acai and simpacuri butter. And I think for our community, our sustainability story was always very much tied to nature and tied to Brazil. But for anybody out there who's ever had to formulate a product, you know that your body cream is not just acai berries, that's your breakfast. So there are hundreds of other ingredients that are always wrapping around those iconic ones. And our work was really to start to understand those very simple questions that are very hard to answer. What exactly did this start as, and where did it come from? What was the feedstock? What was the country of origin? And we had to recruit external help, including Peer Strategies, to do a really high level risk assessment. What other supply chains are we involved in? And that led us to understanding we're not just tied to Brazil, we're tied to palm, we're tied to coconut, corn, dozens and dozens and dozens of additional ties back to nature that we needed to consider and think about how are we going to prioritize the work that we're going to do in these supply chains. And so the team really helped us. But we had another challenge, which was internally. Again, everyone's like, we're sustainable, we're super tied to Brazil. And we needed to find a way to talk about all of the total, supply chains that we're involved in. So we set up a full day training, had Colleen come in and join us. And you know how tough it is to get 30 minutes on somebody's calendar. So the fact that we got our product developers and product engineers in a room for an entire day to talk about sustainable sourcing was a huge message back to the business, right? That this is important to us. So we brought those teams in, we sat down, we went through just building a common vocabulary. What is deforestation? What is sustainable sourcing? What certification? What does that mean? Why is it important? And really got everyone, into and comfortable with the idea that we need to really consider more about our ingredients. And the last I'll share is just my favorite part of that whole day was at the end, we put our product developers into small groups, gave them our formula, chose an ingredient and said, research it right now in the room. It could be Brazil nut, for example. What are the social and environmental challenges associated with that? And then come back and tell us, what do you think are the bare minimum things we should accept when we're sourcing this material? Is it livable wage? Is it, they come back and say, did you know this thing's wild harvested? We should absolutely make sure nobody really, cuts down all the trees this is coming from. So we got them excited, we got them engaged, and that helped us in a bigger way form partnerships. And now when they look at an ingredient, they come to us on our sustainability team and say, what do you think? What are the risks? Is this good, bad? What could we be doing differently? And hopefully one day they'll feel really empowered when they're talking to suppliers to have those conversations really early on and start to say, hey, can you do better? What do you got for us? How can you improve this? So internal education, huge for us.
Thank you. Kay, how did your company make that full day training a priority? Like, who was the key internal stakeholder who said you must attend this event?
Yeah, a lot of our work is really supported by our CEO because she really understands and has always valued sustainability and nature. And it was saying to the company very honestly, we know we love Brazil. We know that it's important and nature is a key part of us. So let's get everyone in to make sure we are authentically keeping true to that through everything that we work with. And I also think we have a really curious community that wants to know more. So they're very interested in, yeah, exactly, actually, where are we getting our stuff? And we want to, do the right thing, but we also, want to make sure that we can talk to our consumers and feel good when we do that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's helpful when the CEO supports the all-day meeting.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. All right. Well, Sophia, you're next up. So if you could share a story that helps illustrate your company, your role, and your work.
Great. Yeah, thanks. So I'm the sustainability lead at Seventh Generation. I've been here just since January, so pretty new. But it's been an exciting time. And Seventh Gen, as folks may or may not be familiar with this home care company, which is really founded and dedicated in creating a sustainable, plant-based cleaning and personal care products that promote a healthier, more equitable world for the future. We've discontinued our personal care products, but we continue to provide laundry, dish soap, cleaning products, and such. So nature really has been part of the Seventh Gen story from the beginning. It was founded in 1988, which is 37 years ago, which is actually almost 1.5 generations ago. I really love the numbers around thinking about what is 7 generations, around 200 years. But it was really founded here in Vermont, where I'm based, in Burlington, was founded on a fairly radical notion that corporations could be a powerful force for positive change and play an important role in securing a just and sustainable world. So we were really lucky to have that already. Like that seed was planted, and from that, it became this evolving story. And these roots grew, and we grew into being one of the founding B Corp companies in 2007. A foundation was established in 2012. And since 2020, the focus on that foundation has been supporting Indigenous climate leadership. And then in 2018, we set science-based targets. So we have also our 2030 goals as well, our metrics that we're using around climate, our climate target, circularity, and plastic reduction. And as Colleen mentioned, similar to Everlane, our climate work led us very naturally, I would say, it was a very natural progression to look at creating a nature strategy, which is what we're working on now. And really, because when we were looking at our carbon emissions, oil palm derivatives contribute to about 1/3 of the material greenhouse gas emissions. So it was like, okay, this is a no-brainer. This is also what I love about the nature strategy is thinking about, well, what are our risks? Like if we don't have access to palm oil, that's going to be a problem because that's what we need for the surfactants and the stuff in our soaps and such. So we were really fortunate that our parent company, Unilever, has nature targets also set, and they've been working with an organization in Indonesia called Kaleka. And that was just such a great thing. We saw this opportunity, and what we brought 3 years to the table was saying, well, what if we invested on regenerative agriculture? And this was a new layer that we've been, our palm oil is RSPO certified, and we've been transitioning into that. It's a roundtable sustainable palm oil. Since this is our first full year, but we've been doing that. So that's been really important to us and wanting to invest in how do we do this? And the next step for us is going into NDPE, which is no deforestation, peat, and exploitation. So that's a whole nother level. But basically, my role is around continuing furthering partnerships, really thinking holistically around strategy and how we can deepen our work, really looking at biodiversity. I also love that about the nature work and also other areas such as water. But I'll leave it at that.
Sophia, one follow-up for you on the palm oil stuff. How much of that work is driven by regulations, especially like upcoming, disclosure through EUDR versus voluntary action and like having the support of the parent company with nature targets? I'm curious to like understand better what drives your focus there. Is it voluntary, regulatory, or both?
I think it's both. I would say voluntary is something that we try to just push, and that's my department is called corporate consciousness. So we always try to hold, we're a mission-driven company, and we are setting, the best standards that we can set and trying to give us the guiding light. And then with regulations continuing to come in, that helps. Like we like it when regulations help us do the work that we need to do.
Thank you. I like that it's called corporate consciousness. That's a cool department to work for. All right, Katina, I have a follow-up question for you. Also, you mentioned, or you alluded to landscape approaches. Wondering if you could share a little bit more about what that means for Everlane and like what does collaboration at that scale actually look like?
Yeah, happy to share more. And this is something that is definitely an area of exploration in some ways for us, but really putting more rigor around how we develop some of these programs and taking a lot of inspiration from work that folks have done in like the cosmetics industry, in personal care, in some of these other commodities that my co-panelists have been discussing already. So there's a lot of work that we can sort of mimic, if you will, but specifically for us, where this idea really comes from is just being able to work together across brands or even across industries to support a broader kind of geographical or landscape level approach, specifically in that protection and restoration in those kind of fields or spheres of influence, so that we can really address the needs of nature and biodiversity and local communities on the ground. So, in some cases, I think what we've learned from the work that we've been doing in analyzing both our risks and our gaps and where our opportunities are is that we've been pretty good about sustainably managing at least the types of commodities or the types of materials and ingredients that we've been so closely focused on finding the right sources for, but we've sort of left out this broader level of protection and restoration. And as a company of our size, we're important, but we're certainly not huge. We're not a giant, and we have limited budgets. We have limited time and scope. And just as a point of reference, even in our finished good factories that we partner with, we make up less than 10% of any supplier's volume. So we have, at kind of our very closest level of supply chain influence, we have a fairly small level of leverage that we're able to provide. So whenever you think about that and extrapolate it, it's sometimes 7, 8, 10 levels behind at the farm level or at the geographical level, it's even more diluted. And in many cases, especially where we are just purchasing commodities like organic cotton, we don't necessarily have those, in all cases, those specific direct relationships with sourcing mechanisms. So thinking about how we expand, not just from a specific commodity perspective, but really looking at the entire geographical region, which have so many opportunities across these different impacts and spheres in the nature and biodiversity kind of assessment framework. Thinking about how we can come together with other companies that have a shared risk and have a shared supply chain as us, and investing in those impact areas, but also really importantly in the people, and particularly the indigenous communities on the ground that are already doing that work, is something that's really exciting, and just a really great way, I think, for partnership and participation.
Thank you. So curious, like, have you identified then specific companies that do make up a bigger part of the supply for like any specific ingredient? Like what are the steps internally you take to like figure that out? Who do we partner with and for which material?
Well, I think we're starting to try to put that together right now. I think the what's really great about this community is that we might be competitive in different ways, certainly from like a customer perspective sometimes, but we're also very collaborative. And I think we recognize, and there's a growing number of other brands and companies that recognize that we can't do this work alone. It really requires an additional level of investment and time, especially whenever we're thinking about these very, big, complex global issues, whether that be climate or nature. There's absolutely no way that one company can drive the solutions that we need. So some of it is a little intuitive. We talk to each other. We know who's sourcing cotton from which regions. We also can get that information just kind of organically through our supply chain vendors. We know who else is working in a shared supply chain just by nature of that. And then, yeah, we're starting to really start to convene and have these conversations with other brands, where we're trying to decide and focus together where can we have the greatest impacts across commodities and regions that we share both those risks and those opportunities with.
Great, thank you. So I do just want to make sure folks on the call know that you can drop your Q&A. If you have any questions, drop it in the Q&A box. I don't see anything yet, so I'm going to keep asking the panelists questions, but I'm monitoring that. So please feel free to drop more in here, and I'll pull them in as we go. But so I want to maybe follow up with you, Colleen, since we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Anything to add to this landscape piece? Because I know it's something that you're focused on, and you happen to be convening companies that could collaborate.
Yes, thanks, Alex, for asking that. I think as Katina had just pointed out, no single company can do this at the geographic scale that's required. As we know, just an ecological approach to things requires a watershed approach, a landscape approach. These are the sorts of terms that are being used. And so it is important to have those conversations, as Katina mentioned, in between brands and whatnot. But what we've been exploring is bringing together and convening multiple brands around a sectoral issue. So looking at food and ag, looking at textile and fashion, and just exploring first of all, where are those commonalities in ingredients or in commodities? Are there geographies where they're already vested and where there's opportunity to expand and explore partnership? And that's, it's part of one of the science-based targets, nature land targets, is to engage at the landscape scale externally and with others. So it's very much part of the broader nature strategy approach. So more and more companies are going to be needing to address this, and we're in real time exploring what this looks like and how to do this in a way that is really taking place in a pre-competitive space, because the risk is everyone's, and the suppliers are shared, the supply shed is shared, the raw materials are shared, and it's really the only way to address it from an ecologically relevant level to actually stem those threats that I shared earlier.
Thank you. All right, so we got a bunch of good questions now coming in. So I'm going to start to link these in, and one that might slide in nicely with the landscape conversation. We've got a few questions around water and also nature-based carbon credits. So I'm just going to ask you each to answer this like very briefly. How does water strategy or nature-based carbon credits fit in to your nature work? So I'll start with you, Sophia.
Yeah, so I think that fits into the landscape question really, and with water, I'll say. And so with the organization that we've been working with, Kaleka and Centro Kalimantan, Indonesia, they really work to build local governance, and I think really looking at the whole ecosystem is so important. So water is clearly a part of that. And how do we create these resilient rural economies? And so water, I would say, is definitely the next piece. But it has to be like everybody has to be part of the conversation to address that.
Kay, how about you? Water and or nature-based carbon credits.
Yeah, water shows up for us in a little bit of a different way. Our focus has been, again, back on formula, thinking about biodegradability. What are the choices we're making as a company from an ingredient selection perspective that is impacting water? So are you using biodegradable ingredients in a shower wash that's going to be going down the drain? So we're really approaching it from understanding what is and isn't biodegradable, what are the alternatives, what should we swap out? And these are some tough conversations to have, again, internally with your product developers, but they know they're coming when we're saying, hey, is there something else that you could be using in your portfolio that's going to help protect water by ensuring that things are going to break down and they're not going to leave any toxic, chemicals behind. So a lot of work to do there, but that's how our focus right now is on water. Let's fix those things first that we most directly touch. Let's get those right.
Katina, anything for you? And also curious, like if water scarcity risk comes into play.
Yeah, certainly. And we've done a pretty good amount of work on trying to understand and assess our water risks, both at kind of the farm and raw material origin perspective, as well as through the entirety of the wet processing that's really required to transform a fiber into something that you're wearing. There's actually a lot of water intensive processing that happens to your clothing. So we've done a lot of work already to measure and understand where those impacts are, and we're taking action both on the manufacturing side as well as on kind of the raw material origin and sourcing side as well. But I think what this question is really bringing up for me is just the interconnected nature of this type of work, which is a little bit different from, I think, the way that not necessarily everyone, but a lot of climate work has been viewed, which is almost with a little bit of tunnel vision on the specificity of greenhouse gas reduction. Whereas this nature-based approach really allows you to bring in and think about the complexity of a system level, of like an entire landscape or geographical level. And something that many people who have worked in this space for a long time understand the concept of a watershed. It's essentially the exact same thing. Like it is that kind of simple, especially whenever we're thinking about like the sourcing component or the sourcing perspective. So yeah, water plays a really big point for us. It's a big area of risk, again, an opportunity that we've analyzed and that we're bringing forward with the next steps that we're going to take on nature and biodiversity. But it's so interconnected with everything else. As we all know, we all need water to survive. So it's a really big point of our strategy, existing and also future.
Thank you. I'm so excited. You're all working on nature and water, not just one or the other. And love that it's actually sounds quite integrated for all of you. So I think this one might be a quick one, but do any of you have site-specific biodiversity actions in the United States?
I will say not yet, but we're gonna need some because corn from the US turned out to be one of those things we identify. We use a lot of alcohol in our fragrances, so that is work ahead of us that we need to look at. So please ping me on the side if there's any great projects going on to help with regenerative corn. Let me know. We would love to learn a little bit more about that.
Same.
Great, let's connect.
Same, same.
Here you go. This is how the landscape approach really
Yes.
begins.
Partner.
I love that. Exciting.
Yeah, we're supporting some work actually in regenerative grazing with a partner called Native. We've been supporting this project for a couple of years. It's sort of related back to some of our leather consumption and our leather use. And yeah, we are supporting a Montana regenerative grazing project that's really meant to try to restore the landscape in Montana using grazing practices, responsible and regenerative grazing practices of cattle and steer that end up eventually in the meat industry primarily, but also has a kind of side impacts into the leather industry. It's fairly small. Leather is a pretty small commodity for us that we are purchasing and sourcing, but it is important because it does have an outsized impact to, again, going back to our climate impacts and where this all kind of originated from. For us, that's been what we've been working on in the U.S.
Alex,
Great. And I think, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just thought I might add to that. In the resource list, we have the case study from Toyota, which has a good example. It's the Toyota North America group, and so they are working on pollinator restoration projects that equate their operational footprint across North America. So there's some good example. There's a good example there about some of what's happening very locally as well. We've got other clients too who are doing that, but I think it's just really important to note that this is why doing this work in nature is so critical because of risks to supply chains around the world. And just you think about the miles where things have to travel and how can you build that resilience into your backyard. But also wanted to note with Toyota, one of the things that we've looked at is their ports and the impact on shipping and marine impacts to wildlife and such. Just when you think about the movement of all these supplies and materials around the world to get them from point A to point B, it's why looking across your entire value chain is so important. So it's a great question. Thanks for raising that one.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm gonna try to wrap us up quickly with just one more question. Um, so I'm gonna pull from Carolyn's question up top here. How do your teams go about getting internal buy-in on sustainability initiatives? But I'm gonna frame it so we can be concise here. If you could give one tip to another company looking to get buy-in for nature initiatives, what piece of advice would you give them? I'll start with you, Sophia.
Yeah, I believe sustainability is woven best throughout the whole company and that people have the solutions. And that was the approach I came with. So I love nature. I have a background in food systems. So just talk, and just like get people love to talk about nature.
Awesome. Keep talking about it. Okay, how about you?
Similar vein to that. It's talk about it and also learn to speak the internal language of your teams because they are not all the same. So how you talk to your marketing team is very different than how you talk to your technical experts. I'll give you a very quick story from our executive director who's fabulous, but wanted to talk to some, high level leaders in the organization. Was doing a very complicated climate fresk in the middle of the jungle. This is not a joke. This really happened. And there was, I think, a lot of not confusion, but it's sometimes really scary and difficult and complicated to talk about these topics. She realized after the fact what they really needed to hear was this is our jar. It's made with virgin plastic that comes from petroleum, which is driving climate change. So we need some recycled content. Like they needed really clear ties back to the product. So speak the language, fail, get up, dust yourself off, try it again. Because once you unlock how to talk to people in a way that inspires them and resonates with them individually, then those nature conversations get really, really good. And you're right, Sophia, people have the solutions and they want to talk about it. So find your language, get up. If it doesn't work the first time, try it again.
Did you say they were doing like a workshop in the middle of the
The
jungle?
middle of in Brazil, like they took the leadership team, in. It's great to get in nature, but let them experience nature. Maybe, climate fresk on the climate, jungle floor is not. It's always it's fun, but maybe.
I love that. That's something I would come up with.
Totally, totally.
Amazing. I love that practical advice. Katina, how about you?
Yeah, I love both of those contributions so much, and I don't even know what I can substantively add at this point. But I think one of the things that I've actually been very sort of surprised, but also, pleasantly surprised internally is people can grasp onto nature-based impacts a lot more easily and simply than they can, for example, climate impacts. We see this within our internal teams. We see this within our leadership and our board. We also see this with customers, and we've done some interesting testing of just what is resonating with people. And where climate can feel very nebulous, we're talking about measurements on a kg per CO2e basis or metric tons sometimes. I think our brains are not necessarily wired to understand what that impact means, and what we need to do about it. So there's been a lot more educating and engaging, and to Kay's point, sort of code switching that we have to do across different teams to be able to communicate and get buy-in. Whereas on the nature side, anybody who's ever enjoyed a park or a walk outside or anything more advanced than that has an inherent understanding of why this work is important. And it's a lot easier to connect that to the specific materials that you're sourcing, the products that you're creating, or just the work that you're doing in general and the impacts socially on the ground that those contribute to. So just keep doing it, as both Sophia and Kay have already mentioned. But I think you'll find a lot more participation and partnership internally around nature because it is just so much better understood by us, we humans.
Thank you all so much. I'm gonna ask if I could get the slides back up on the screen to wrap us up. So that's all the time that we have for today. It was so lovely to speak with all of you, and thank you to our audience for joining. And thank you to my colleague behind the scenes, Ambry and Julia, for making everything run so smoothly. If you'd like to rewatch this webinar or share it, the recording will be archived on trellis.net, and our team will email you the link once it's available later today. You can also check out these resources that have been shared in the chat throughout this whole presentation. Is there one more slide? Let's see. All right. Lastly, if you want to watch more Trellis webinars, you can visit trellis.net/webinars. So on behalf of my colleagues at Trellis and our speakers, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Alex Navarro, and it's been a pleasure chatting with you all. Thank you.